I'm done being poor. I'm done listening to you. You want money? Then dig your own grave first. You are the reason I'm drowning, not them. You!
One choice, one night, and a boy becomes prey.
Kano, survival is war. Family is the battlefield.
I wish I could stop, but it's too late.
Hardship had weighed on Malam's family for so long that sometimes Idris felt as if poverty had carved their name into every brick, every rusted sheet of tin on their roof. During the day, Malam crouched in front of his tiny shoe repair stall at the corner of the market, his back bent like the worn-out soles he patched. Torn shoes and broken sandals piled up before him. Every time he lifted his head, the shadows of passing people slid by fast, indifferent, as if he didn't truly exist. The Kano sun burned like fire, sweat carving dark trails down his weathered face. But the money he earned by nightfall was so little Idris didn't even dare ask. In the evenings, when the market quieted down, Malam always stayed a little longer. His hands worked that thick needle over and over, pulling the thread through tough leather. The sickly yellow lamp cast a faint glow over his wife's face then, exhausted, coughing so hard each time it sounded like her lungs might tear. And every time she coughed, Idris saw something flicker in his father's eyes. Malam would turn away, pretending to focus on a broken sandal, pretending not to notice the nearly empty bottle of medicine on the wooden shelf. School fees, medicine, food. Everything stacked on his father's shoulders like boulders crushing a man already worn down. Idris understood that. But understanding didn't fill his stomach. It didn't fix his frayed clothes. It didn't silence the snickers from his classmates. At school, Idris had a few friends. They showed up in spotless white sneakers, expensive t-shirts, and phones with bright, glassy screens. During breaks, they huddled together showing pictures from new cafes, a borrowed motorcycle, or the latest phone, just one easy deal away. "Idris, you still using that cracked thing?" One of them laughed, nodding at his chipped phone. Idris forced a smile, slipped it back into his pocket, and his fingers tightened until the knuckles went pale. He didn't respond, but the question lingered like a stone in his chest. Why do I have to live like this? That evening, on the way home, Idris walked past the empty lot behind the market. At dusk, the place suddenly turned alive in a way that felt wrong. Old trucks with dim headlights lined up in silence. Strange men spoke quietly, but their hands moved fast, hauling heavy crates like it was the most normal job in the world. In the shadows, Idris caught the eyes of Sani, a classmate who always seemed to have cash to burn. Sani raised his chin, motioning him closer. "You want it?" Sani asked bluntly, no hesitation. What? Idris swallowed, glancing at the crates. "Money. You want to get out of that broken shack of yours, right?" Sani's voice was low, dry yet coated with a kind of poisonous sweetness. "All you do is help us carry stuff, move stuff, nothing big. One night equals a whole month of your dad stitching sandals." Those last words slapped Idris harder than any insult. His father, the needle and thread, the sweat. His mother's violent coughing, that empty medicine bottle. And the leaking shack where rainwater dripped straight into the living room. Idris felt his heartbeat quicken. What kind of stuff?" he asked, though his voice no longer sounded steady. Sani smirked. "The kind of stuff old men like your dad call trouble. But for us, it's a ticket out of this place. Look." He lifted a corner of the tarp. Idris glimpsed rows of small boxes, strange labels, plastic bags tied tight. He didn't fully understand, but the air around them reeked of danger. "Don't ask too much," Sani said calmly. "The less you know, the better you sleep. I just need one answer. You wanna keep watching your mom choke on cheap medicine and your dad die slowly on that damn stool? Or you wanna change your life?" The question hovered between them, heavier than the cano dust in the air. The first night Idris stood at his doorway for a long time, staring at the cracks in the walls, the peeling paint, the loose metal sheets on the roof. His mother was asleep, coughing softly. His father sat by the wooden table, head bowed in exhaustion, a half-stitched shoe still in his hands. Idris felt his throat close up. Just a few months. If Sani was right, just a few months, and he could buy better medicine for his mother, fix the roof, pay off the debts. Just a few more months. And I'll escape this damn shack. At first, the thought came quietly, like a whisper. But little by little, it became a mantra, one he repeated every time fear clawed at him. On the second night, Idris earned money for the first time. Crumpled notes more than he had ever held in his life. Sani slapped his back, laughing. See? Nothing's free. But there's always a shortcut for people who dare. Idris came home late. The door was locked. When his father opened it, Malam saw the strange excitement beneath his son's tired face. Idris avoided the gaze and slipped inside silently. Days later, Idris bought a new shirt. Not the cheap kind from the market, the kind he once thought only rich kids wore. People at school stared, nodded, some even patted his shoulder. Sani elbowed him playfully. See how different life feels? Then came the phone. When the screen lit up, reflecting Idris's face, he barely recognized himself. He looked cleaner, sharper, more confident, or at least like someone pretending to be. But at night, when he changed out of his new clothes, he saw something else. His eyes. Before, no matter how poor, they were bright, holding dreams he never dared speak aloud. Now, sometimes he couldn't look at them long. Something dark was spreading there, slowly but surely. Is something wrong? His mother asked one night, when he skipped dinner and kept tapping his phone. He smiled quickly. No, Mom, I'm just trying to make things better. She didn't understand, but she held his hand thin, warm, trembling. Just stay safe. Your father can endure hardship. Don't let yourself get lost, Idris. Lost. That word followed him all night. But the next morning, when sunlight hit the whole riddled roof, when his mother coughed again, when his father hunched over the same old stool and the same broken shoes, the feeling faded. Idris looked at his home, at the endless loop of their life, and the familiar sentence rose again, stronger, sharper. Just a few more months, and I'll escape this shack. He did not know that this very sentence was quietly steering his life away inch by inch toward a place where his father, Malam, would never look at his son with peace again. That night, the desert wind blew colder than usual. The small mud house on the outskirts of Kano, where red dust roads branched out like dried-up veins, sat quiet and lifeless. The oil lamp on the table flickered weakly, its flame trembling like the breath of a dying patient, slow, frail, yet still clinging to life. At this hour, Idris should have been home. Malam sat on the old wooden stool, his back aching after a full day of repairing shoes. He didn't check the time. He didn't own a clock that still worked. But he measured the night by the sound of his wife's coughing. Each cough tore through the darkness, reminding him the medicine was almost gone and the money was nearly spent. Suddenly, the door swung open. Idris stepped in, breathing hard, collar dusty, and what Malam noticed first, his hand trembled slightly, as if he'd just escaped something dangerous. His jacket pocket bulged unnaturally. Idris tried to shove it deeper, but the faint rustle of paper betrayed him. Malam looked at his son for a long moment, then asked, in a voice so soft it felt breakable, "Idris, what are you doing, son?" Idris didn't look at him. His eyes fixed on the cracked wall behind his father, as if the question had nothing to do with him. "I'm doing construction work at night." "Don't worry about it." A poor lie, a rushed answer. Malam was not an educated man, but he had lived long enough to know that real labor left marks. He stared at Idris's hands, soft, clean, not a scratch anywhere. They even smelled faintly of the cheap soap Idris used after coming home from his recent, suspicious late nights. But it wasn't the hands that frightened him, it was the smell. A sharp, chemical odor drifted from Idris's pocket-knot shoe polish, Not dirt from a construction site, but a smell Malam had caught once during a raid at the market, the smell of contraband. The smell of trouble. Idris tried to slip past him toward his room, but Malam gently touched his son's arm. "Idris, my boy, tell me the truth." Idris jerked back instantly, as if burned. His eyes flashed fear at first, then something colder. "Stay out of it." 3 words, sharp as a blade. Malam froze. Idris went into his room and slammed the door. The house sank into silence, broken only by his mother's weak coughing from the corner of the bed. Malam sat down, head bowed. He felt no anger. He didn't think about disrespect or the sharpness in Idris's voice. The only thing he felt was fear tightening around his chest. Fear that Idris was walking into the same darkness so many boys in town had slipped into, never to return. Fear that next time, it wouldn't be the smell of chemicals. It would be the knock of police at the door. Or worse, a body on a stretcher. After Idris fell asleep, Malam could not. He sat beside the dying oil lamp, his hands trembling as they traced the frayed edges of his shirt, eyes fixed on the door. Something felt wrong. He sensed it not with logic, but with the instinct of a father who had spent his life shielding his family. The wind carried strange sounds from the narrow alley outside. Footsteps. Light, quick, familiar. Idris. He was going out again. Without thinking, Malam stood up, threw a thin scarf over his shoulders, and followed quietly. He kept his distance close enough to see, far enough not to alert his son. The red dust road led toward the empty lot at the edge of the market, where by day, goods were dried out under the sun, and by night, things that should never happen happened often. Moonlight slipped through skeletal tree branches. Malam hid behind a crumbling wall. Ahead, shadowy figures gathered around an old truck with dying headlights. 2 large men opened the cargo, handing out tightly wrapped bags. Idris approached hesitant at first. Then his hands began to move with practiced ease, taking the bag, inspecting the packaging, handing it off. Nothing about him was clumsy. His movements were smooth, too smooth. Malam felt something inside him collapse. Idris smiled at the men, not the smile he knew. This one was thin, sharp like a boy who had traded something inside himself for something glittering in return. One of the big men gave Idris a stack of cash. He counted it faster than he ever solved math problems at school. He shoved the money into the inside pocket of his black hoodie. And in that moment, the smile, the cash, the illegal goods stabbed Malam's chest like a knife, not because of anger, not because of shame, but because he was witnessing the one thing every father fears most, the moment his son steps out of the light, the moment he loses him. His heartbeat pounded so hard he had to lean on the wall for support. His legs trembled not from exhaustion, but from a deeper pain. Idris had chosen a road Malam could not walk beside him on. Under the pale moonlight, Malam felt himself age years in minutes. When Idris left the lot, Malam shrank deeper into the shadows. He didn't want Idris to know he had seen anything. Not out of fear of being yelled at, not out of fear of resentment, but because he knew if Idris discovered him there, cornered by guilt and the anger of youth, he might say or do something that could never be undone. He waited several minutes before following the same path home. Every step felt heavy. The desert wind blew hard, but couldn't carry away the tightness in his throat. When he reached the door, the light in Idris's room flickered off. The boy had gone to bed, as if this night were nothing unusual. But for Malam, it wasn't. He opened the door quietly, stepped inside, and sat beside his sleeping wife. Her breathing was labored. Malam lifted a trembling hand to his hair now streaked with gray. He thought of his own father, of tradition, of all the things he once hoped to teach Idris. All of it seemed to dissolve in that chemical-tainted darkness. The oil lamp finally died. In the blackness, Malam whispered so quietly no one could hear, "Idris, I'm not angry. I'm just afraid of losing you." Malam waited for Idris just outside the doorway. The hurried sound of his son's footsteps echoed down the red dust alley, blending with the faint murmur of a night market winding down. Overhead, the Kano sky was covered in a pale gray sheet of cloud, empty of stars. Only the beat of a drum from some distant bar rolled through the air, dry and steady, like the heartbeat of someone trying hard to stay calm. The door swung open. Idris stepped in, his dark hoodie coated in dust, his pocket bulging heavier than usual. Sweat dotted his forehead, but his eyes didn't look like someone who'd just done hard physical work. They held the look of someone who'd just crossed a line he didn't dare name. Maylam didn't greet him. He waited until the door shut behind his son, then suddenly reached out, grabbed Idris by the arm, and pulled him deeper into the house. "You're going to stop, tonight." His voice wasn't loud, but it was pulled tight like a rope about to snap. Idris froze, not from pain, but from surprise. This wasn't the avoiding gaze, the shaky questioning of the last few nights. There was something different in Malam's eyes now, fear hardened into resolve. Idris glanced at his father's thin hand clamped on his arm, then laughed. But it wasn't a real laugh. It broke crooked, bitter, tinged with the wild edge of a young man backed into a corner. "Stop for what?" he echoed, lips curling. "So I can stay poor like you for the rest of my life?" Those last words hit the floor like stones. For a moment, Malam went completely still. He let go, as if he'd touched open flame. The oil lamp on the table cast a thin yellow halo over his face, carving out the deep lines at the corners of his eyes. He'd heard enough contempt from the world customers walking by without leaving a coin. The market owner raising his stall fee, people laughing at the torn sandals in his hands. But when those words came from his own son's mouth, it wasn't humiliation anymore. It was a cut. Malam swallowed down the lump rising in his throat, then slowly lifted his hand and set it on Idris's shoulder. This time, he gripped hard, not as a father simply trying to hold his son back, but as a man trying to keep his whole world from slipping off the edge. "I can live with being poor," he said, each word dragged up from somewhere deep in his chest. "But I can't live with losing you." For a brief moment, time seemed to sag in place. The drums from the distant market beat on steady, insistent, tightening the air in the little mud house like a drawn string. The smell of damp earth, leftover cooking smoke, and the sweat of a long grinding day all folded together into something suffocating. Idris panted, his chest rising and falling beneath the fabric. His eyes were bloodshot, whether from lack of sleep, anger, or fear, even he couldn't tell. "I don't need you stepping in anymore," he snapped, jerking his father's hand off. Malam's hand hung there in the air, empty. He stood looking at Idris as if trying to recognize the same child who once ran barefoot around the house in torn shorts, laughing, begging for just one more story before bed. "You always step in. You always act like you know everything. You don't know what it feels like to be laughed at by your own friends." Idris had swallowed those words more times than he could count. Every time he saw his father bent under the sun, stitching shoes, he felt a pang of pity. But every time he looked at his old phone, remembered the snide comments, remembered his mother coughing in the dark, that pity twisted into something else. Malam moved closer, refusing to be pushed back this time. He blocked Idris's path like a final door. "Son," his voice was hoarse but steady, "tonight I followed you. I saw everything. The truck, the crates, those men, that chemical smell." Idris froze. He blinked once, slow enough that they could both hear the distant drumbeats echo in the silence between them. "You," his lips twitched into something like a laugh that never quite formed. "You followed me?" Something inside Idris got hit hard. Not guilt, at least not yet. It was the suffocating feeling of being cornered, exposed, stripped bare before he'd had the chance to build the perfect excuse. "You had no right to do that," Idris said, voice climbing. "You don't get to stand there, watch me, and pretend you understand what's going on." Malam shook his head, and for the first time in a long while, his eyes burned with a fierce light. "I don't need to understand everything. I only need to know one thing: you're walking toward your own death. You think those men are your friends? You think when trouble comes, they'll protect you? No, they'll throw you out first. And I'll be the one who has to go to the morgue and identify the body. Idris. The moment the word morgue left his mouth, he felt as if he'd cursed his own son. His lips trembled. Idris clenched his teeth. In his mind, his father wasn't the man who'd worked himself half to death for the family, but the symbol of everything he wanted to outrun: resignation, endless poverty, leaky roofs, cheap medicine, meager meals. You're always talking about fear, Idris shouted. You're scared of trouble, scared of debt, scared of shame. But me? I'm scared of living my whole life like you. Do you get that? The question ripped through the room. From the bed, his mother shifted and coughed softly, but didn't wake. Malam stepped even closer, close enough that Idris could see every bead of sweat on his father's forehead. I'm not afraid of being ashamed, Malam whispered, as if speaking to someone very far away. I'm afraid that one day someone will call me. And what I get back won't be my son who argues with me, who gets mad at me, who makes mistakes, but a body gone cold. Do you understand that fear, Idris? Silence. For a heartbeat, Idris's eyes wavered. Deep inside, a child was screaming. But the drums outside kept pounding, urging him to harden, to stand by the path he'd chosen. If he faltered now, all those nights of hauling illegal goods, all that dirty money, would feel pointless. I'm already in, Idris said, his voice rough. There's no stop tonight, like you say. Do you even know what happens if I walk away now? Malam didn't answer. He didn't know. Not really. He didn't understand the rules of smugglers or the punishments for betrayal. But he knew one thing. If he stayed silent, he would lose his son. He lifted both hands and gripped Idris's shoulders, squeezing hard enough to force his son to look him in the eye. I don't need to know, he said, each word heavy as stone. I only know that from tonight on, my son does not work for those men. If I have to get on my knees, I'll get on my knees. If I have to beg, I'll beg. If we have to pack up and leave this place, I'll do it. But I will not stand here and watch you disappear. Idris could feel his father's breath on his face, hot and shaking. The smell of smoke, earth, and worn-out sweat clinging to his clothes. It was both painfully familiar and suffocating. Let go of me, Idris said quietly. No, Malam replied without hesitation. You don't understand this. Then explain it to me. Even if I do, you won't accept it. I don't need to accept it. I just need you alive. They grappled, their breath mingling. Malam's hands held on, just like when Idris was a little boy and tried to run into the street and he had to grab him so he wouldn't get hit by a car. But Idris wasn't that skinny kid in ripped shorts anymore. He was a 19-year-old young man, all sharp edges and unhealed wounds his father had never truly seen. Let go, Idris growled, eyes blazing. No. In that instant, the string inside the house had been pulled as tight as it could go. Idris didn't think. He didn't calculate. He didn't see his mother sleeping right there. Didn't see the medicine bottle on the shelf. Didn't remember the nights his father stayed up late under the oil lamp, stitching shoes to catch a deadline. All that was left in him was a burning rush from his chest, up his throat, down into his arms. He shoved. It wasn't just a reflexive pull away. It was a push loaded with years of frustration. Every mocking laugh from his friends, the shame of being poor, the helpless rage of watching his mother cough without money for decent medicine, the anger of seeing his father bow his head to everyone. It all poured into the hands that flung his father out of the way. Malam had nothing to grab onto. His feet slipped on the dusty, ashy floor. His back slammed into the edge of the wooden table, making the old bowls rattle. His body tipped sideways, crashing into the clay stove. The small flame inside flared bright for a second, then dimmed. Time slowed. Idris stood there, arms still outstretched, chest heaving, eyes wide with horror. The drumbeats from the far-off market kept pounding, but now they sounded like they belonged to another world. Malam lay on his side on the ground, one arm wrapped around his ribs, his breathing uneven. He stared up at the ceiling, then slowly turned his head until his eyes met his son's. No curse. No threat. Just a question, unspoken, hanging in the space between them. How did we end up here, my son? Idris felt his knees weaken. For a brief second, he wanted to rush over, help his father up, say, "I'm sorry." But another voice hissed in his head, "You made your choice." Turning back now is weak, cowardly. And so, in that small house thick with the smell of earth, smoke, and a pain that had no name, the defining moment finally happened. One push, one step across the line. And from that night on, no matter how much money Idris made, no matter what he bought, the shadow of this night would walk beside him, long, heavy, and impossible to erase. In that moment, no longer than a single drumbeat echoing from the distant market, Idris lost control. Malam's hands gripped his shoulders, his breath hot and trembling. Idris could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears like a hammer. "Don't interfere anymore. Don't force me to stay poor. Don't drag me down." And then he pushed. Not a light shove. Not a simple attempt to pull away and keep arguing. It was a push fueled by years of buried resentment, by the exhaustion of watching his father bow his head to life again and again. And that one push shattered everything. The sound of fate. Malam stumbled. His feet slipped on the dry, dusty floor. His arms reached out desperately for something to hold on to, but there was nothing, only empty air. Then, thud, the sound cracked through the room, cold, sharp, cutting straight across the lives of father and son. His head struck the edge of the clay stove. The small flame inside flared into a sharp yellow burst, then flickered weakly, as if mimicking his breath. Idris froze. The whole world seemed to collapse, folding into a white, empty void. "Dad?" His voice escaped like a thin, broken whisper. Malam lay on his side, one arm stretched out as if trying to reach for Idris, the other wrapped around his ribs. Blood trickled from a small cut at his temple, running in two thin lines like red threads down a face far too old for his age. Idris stepped back, as if the ground itself had pushed him away. "Dad," he repeated, this time his voice cracked, jagged like a fractured mirror. Malam exhaled softly. Too softly. His eyes were half open, not holding anger or disappointment anymore. Only exhaustion, fear, and something deeper. The pain of a father who knows he's losing his son. "Idris." He tried to speak, but his voice came out as a trembling breath. A fear he'd never felt before. Idris collapsed to his knees beside him, his hands shaking so hard he couldn't touch his father. "Dad, please. Get up. I didn't mean to. I only wanted." But the last word stuck in his throat, swallowed by the darkness of the room. The small house suddenly felt too quiet, so quiet Idris could hear his own heartbeat. Fast one moment, stumbling the next, almost stopping. Malam's breathing weakened. His eyelids trembled, then slowly drifted shut. Idris panicked. He reached for his father's shoulder, shaking him gently. Dad, don't sleep. Look at me." The flame in the stove dimmed, its light shrinking from the room like a soul being pulled from a body. Idris pressed 2 fingers to his father's neck, searching for a pulse. There, but faint. So faint that a single breeze could blow it away. His eyes reddened, tears gathering but not falling. Not because he was strong, but because he was terrified. Not of being arrested, not of the smuggler's revenge, but of what his father had warned him about, the fear of one day seeing him lying still, like this. A sound that split the night then. From outside, a sharp wail broke the silence. "Wee-ee-dash-o-o-o-o-dash-wee-ee-ee-dash-o-o-o-o." Police sirens. For the first time in his life, Idris felt that sound wasn't justice, but death calling. His whole body shook. Not just for his father, but because he knew exactly why the police were coming. The smuggling ring had been caught. The men who once made him feel powerful, who handed him money like it grew from their palms, were now in handcuffs. And of course, they would name everyone involved, including him. Idris looked at the door, then at his father, then at the shifting shadows outside. He felt like he was standing between two spears, one pointed at the crimes he'd fallen into, and the other lying right beneath him. "Dad!" His voice shattered into pieces. I'm sorry." But Malam didn't answer. His breath was a flicker, close to fading out. Idris placed his hand over his father's chest, trying to feel the life still hiding somewhere beneath the thin shirt. "I'll get you to the hospital. I swear, Dad." But his mind spun, drowning like it was sinking underwater. He couldn't hear himself anymore, couldn't hear the wind. Only the sirens, growing louder and louder. All because of one push. 1 second of lost control. One moment when hurt and pride outshouted reason. And now, Idris's entire world was collapsing. He looked at his father one last time before lifting him, pulling his heavy body onto his shoulder. Malam let out a faint groan barely audible. Idris broke. For the first time in years, he cried, "I'll save you. I will. I have to." The sirens wailed again, closer, sharper, slicing through the Kano night. Idris knew the police would be here any second. And if they entered the house now, his father might not survive. And his future would end right here. All because of one push. A single push that felt small, but strong enough to twist fate itself. He stood, held his father tight, and ran into the darkness, praying that the night would be kinder than the life he had chosen. That night, Idris hid in the firewood shed behind the house. The shed was nothing more than a makeshift corner. Rotting planks leaned against each other, piles of dry wood stacked high, dust everywhere, the smell of mold mixing with damp earth. But to Idris, it was a cave for someone who had just pushed his father to the ground, a place to hide, and a silent courtroom judging him from the inside. His hands still carried Malam's blood, not much, just a thin smear darkening between the creases of his skin. But for Idris, it weighed more than all the money he had ever stuffed into his pockets. He tried wiping it on his shirt, but the more he rubbed, the more it spread, the more it blurred. Eventually, he stopped and left it there, because even if he washed it off his hands, there was another stain inside his chest, one that would never come clean. Outside, the patrol car's headlights swept across the narrow alley. The cold white-blue beam slid over cracked walls, rusted tin roofs, and doors shut tight out of fear of trouble. Each time the light drew near, Idris held his breath, pressing his back against the cold wooden boards. The sirens had stopped, but the engine still growled somewhere nearby. Idris could hear voices slipping through the gaps in the shed, stern voices, annoyed voices, voices guessing and arguing about what had just happened in the neighborhood. He closed his eyes. His breathing was uneven, trapped between two chests, the one belonging to the young man he'd become, and the one belonging to the child who used to just want his father's arms around him after every fall. If only I had stopped sooner. The thought sliced through his mind, sharp as a blade. If he had said no the first time Sani invited him. If he had run home after taking that first stack of cash, thrown it on the table, and confessed everything. If tonight, when his father asked, he hadn't lied about working construction at night. If. But that river of thoughts changed nothing except sinking him deeper into the pit of regret yawning beneath his feet. If I had just listened to him once, Idris whispered, as if someone were sitting beside him, but no one was there. Only a single sliver of moonlight seeping through the gaps in the shed's roof and the sound of insects tearing apart the silence of the night. He clasped his head in both hands, crouching, forehead pressed to his knees. In the darkness, the scenes from tonight kept replaying like a jammed film reel, his father's hands gripping his shoulders. Malam's harsh voice, "I can accept being poor, but I cannot accept losing you." His own shout, "I don't need you interfering anymore." The shove. The cold, brutal thud of Malam's head hitting the stove. His father's fading eyes. Idris felt something tightening around his throat, not the hands of the police, not the invisible leash of the smugglers, but the very path of quick money he had willingly walked into. A path that started with a promise, just a few more months. Then I'll escape this damn shack. But now that sentence no longer sounded like hope. It sounded like a curse. In the dark, Idris let out a laugh, but it wasn't a real one. It twisted at the corner of his mouth and broke into a sob. The quick money path he'd chosen wasn't an escape anymore. It was a rope tightening around his neck. The more he struggled, the tighter it pulled. Outside, police boots stomped across the dirt. Someone knocked on a neighbor's door. Voices barked questions, accusations, commands. Idris thought he heard the name of the smuggling group, heard someone stuttering a half-confession. A name maybe his almost slipped out, but was swallowed back down. He shivered. If they named him. If the police knew he was one of the carriers. If they found out. Idris clenched his fists until his nails dug deep into his skin. But what scared him most wasn't the thought of handcuffs, or being shoved into a patrol car, or being branded a criminal. What terrified him was the image of Malam lying on the floor, blood trickling down his temple, breath fading, and the very real possibility that his father might never stand up to scold him again. "Dad," he whispered into the darkness, unsure if Malam could hear him at all. "I thought I was saving us. I thought money would fix everything. But I destroyed everything instead." A cold draft slid through the cracks, carrying the faint smell of old cooking fire from Idris's clothes. He suddenly remembered all the nights his father stayed up late stitching shoes, the times he skipped meals, so Idris, and his mother could eat, the moment he said, "I'm only afraid of losing you." Malam had spent his entire life letting life break his back, but he had never once let go of his son. And tonight, it was his son's hands that had pushed him down. Tears burned down Idris's face. He wiped them instinctively, then touched the dried blood on his skin. The contact felt like an electric jolt. All because of one push. 1 second of lost control. One moment when hurt and pride outshouted reason. And now, Idris's entire world was collapsing. He looked at his father one last time before lifting him, pulling his heavy body onto his shoulder. Malam let out a faint groan barely audible. Idris broke. For the first time in years, he cried, "I'll save you. I will. I have to." The sirens wailed again, closer, sharper, slicing through the Kano night. Idris knew the police would be here any second. And if they entered the house now, his father might not survive. And his future would end right here. All because of one push. A single push that felt small, but strong enough to twist fate itself. He stood, held his father tight, and ran into the darkness, praying that the night would be kinder than the life he had chosen. That night, Idris hid in the firewood shed behind the house. The shed was nothing more than a makeshift corner. Rotting planks leaned against each other, piles of dry wood stacked high, dust everywhere, the smell of mold mixing with damp earth. But to Idris, it was a cave for someone who had just pushed his father to the ground, a place to hide, and a silent courtroom judging him from the inside. His hands still carried Malam's blood, not much, just a thin smear darkening between the creases of his skin. But for Idris, it weighed more than all the money he had ever stuffed into his pockets. He tried wiping it on his shirt, but the more he rubbed, the more it spread, the more it blurred. Eventually, he stopped and left it there, because even if he washed it off his hands, there was another stain inside his chest, one that would never come clean. Outside, the patrol car's headlights swept across the narrow alley. The cold white-blue beam slid over cracked walls, rusted tin roofs, and doors shut tight out of fear of trouble. Each time the light drew near, Idris held his breath, pressing his back against the cold wooden boards. The sirens had stopped, but the engine still growled somewhere nearby. Idris could hear voices slipping through the gaps in the shed, stern voices. Annoyed voices, voices guessing and arguing about what had just happened in the neighborhood. He closed his eyes. His breathing was uneven, trapped between two chests, the one belonging to the young man he'd become, and the one belonging to the child who used to just want his father's arms around him after every fall. If only I had stopped sooner. The thought sliced through his mind, sharp as a blade. If he had said no the first time Sonny invited him. If he had run home after taking that first stack of cash, thrown it on the table, and confessed everything. If tonight, when his father asked, he hadn't lied about working construction at night. If. But that river of thoughts changed nothing except sinking him deeper into the pit of regret yawning beneath his feet. If I had just listened to him once, Idris whispered, as if someone were sitting beside him, but no one was there. Only a single sliver of moonlight seeping through the gaps in the shed's roof and the sound of insects tearing apart the silence of the night. He clasped his head in both hands, crouching, forehead pressed to his knees. In the darkness, the scenes from tonight kept replaying like a jammed film reel, his father's hands gripping his shoulders. Malon's harsh voice, "I can accept being poor, but I cannot accept losing you." His own shout, "I don't need you interfering anymore." The shove. The cold, brutal thud of Malam's head hitting the stove. His father's fading eyes. Idris felt something tightening around his throat, not the hands of the police, not the invisible leash of the smugglers, but the very path of quick money he had willingly walked into. A path that started with a promise, just a few more months. Then I'll escape this damn shack. But now that sentence no longer sounded like hope. It sounded like a curse. In the dark, Idris let out a laugh, but it wasn't a real one. It twisted at the corner of his mouth and broke into a sob. The quick money path he'd chosen wasn't an escape anymore. It was a rope tightening around his neck. The more he struggled, the tighter it pulled. Outside, police boots stomped across the dirt. Someone knocked on a neighbor's door. Voices barked questions, accusations, commands. Idris thought he heard the name of the smuggling group, heard someone stuttering a half-confession. A name maybe his almost slipped out, but was swallowed back down. He shivered. If they named him. If the police knew he was one of the carriers. If they found out. Idris clenched his fists until his nails dug deep into his skin. But what scared him most wasn't the thought of handcuffs, or being shoved into a patrol car, or being branded a criminal. What terrified him was the image of Malam lying on the floor, blood trickling down his temple, breath fading, and the very real possibility that his father might never stand up to scold him again. "Dad," he whispered into the darkness, unsure if Malam could hear him at all. "I thought I was saving us. I thought money would fix everything. But I destroyed everything instead." A cold draft slid through the cracks, carrying the faint smell of old cooking fire from Idris's clothes. He suddenly remembered all the nights his father stayed up late stitching shoes, the times he skipped meals, so Idris, and his mother could eat, the moment he said, "I'm only afraid of losing you." Malam had spent his entire life letting life break his back, but he had never once let go of his son. And tonight, it was his son's hands that had pushed him down. Tears burned down Idris's face. He wiped them instinctively, then touched the dried blood on his skin. The contact felt like an electric jolt,